Well, I believe that the claim that poetry is superior to prose is a foolish claim. I see no reason to value Shakespeare's prose any less highly than his poetry. The poets got together a long time ago and agreed that they would peddle this particular line, that all literature would be poetry if it could, and a lot of literature would be lyric if it possibly could, or French symbolist lyric if it possibly could. So when I was professor of poetry, my first lecture was on why is there this foolish prejudice against prose. Prose gives you prosy, gives you prosaic, and there's a pretense that, etc. So for me, the question of close reading isn't a question about the inherent superiority. These are different systems of punctuation. Eliot, I think, is quite right to get it down to that. Whatever else they may or may not be, different systems of punctuation. I've written about Keats' spelling before. I'm coming back to it now with the particular instance of To Autumn. I'll mention other cases where the spelling seems to me to be a clue to thoughts and impressions and expressions which are in the air for him, which don't make it into the final text, but are in touch with the final text. That is, if you spell exalt with an H, E-X-H-A-L-T, you are bringing together something about breathing and exhalation and inspiration together with something about the lofty, the high, the noble. So you may even be wanting, once you've opened that up, to exalt. So my point about these many, many misspellings in him all the time, the point is the way in which there are suggestions towards interpretation. You can find this silly clever, you can find it somebody who, knowing that he is not a poet, likes making up things and attributing them to the poet. But I think that when Keats writes ridiculous, spelling it R-E-D, there is in his mind the foolishness that should make somebody blush. The lover is ridiculous. These are not consciously planned, I think. Keats often comments on his own propensity to misspell it. And the famous case is the word purplu, where he's writing to Fanny Brawne. He apologizes for the pen nib. There's a certain amount about the pen nib and how it's filling in the E's so that they look like C's and so on. He starts to write purple, and then he's not clear whether it's blue or purple, and he writes purplu. And he then comments on his word purplu. It's a difficulty for the editor to know how to reproduce that on the page. In fact, there isn't a way of reproducing that effect on the page that doesn't sacrifice something. The best edition of the letters, the Harvard professor and publication, Hyder Rollins, takes one decision about what to do with other editions of the letters. Do you write P-U-R-P-L? And how do you footnote it, and so on? You've got some time warp involved in it, and so on. So I'm taking To Autumn as a particularly beautiful example of, I think, how informative archival, editorial, manuscript material can be about trains, not just of thought, but trains of feeling. But before I turn to the poem, let me just mention a few such instances, and let me put them in the context of puzzling about intention. When I was a graduate student, we had to care about an essay by Wimsatt on the intentional fallacy. That's sort of disappeared from being mandated for everybody, so people do not immediately know if you say the intentional fallacy, what are you talking about? You were talking about the claim by two extremely intelligent critics who wished to rescue poetry from being reduced to statements by the authors as to what they were what they were up to. So you don't go to Browning and ask Browning, you don't any longer go to Browning and ask, did the Duke murder his last Duchess? If you ask Browning that question, he would give you a very good reply. He would say that he didn't know. She might just have been put in prison and so on. So you get good fending off of certain kinds of questions as deliberately left open. But these spellings are, I think, again and again a clue to something that the various stages of consciousness are aware of. It seems downright pre-intention. My mind leapt over every interval to what I saw was per se a pleasant subject for him. That is, I didn't pre-intend this. I came out with something which is precipitated then and there within me, but not deliberated, and so on. So I'll just mention a very, very good essay by the Oxford philosopher Austin called 3 Ways of Spilling Ink. And it's about the difference between doing something deliberately, doing something on purpose, and doing something intentionally. And it has very amusing anecdotes as to what these would consist of. And it's very, very thoughtful, J.L. Austin, about the difference between doing it deliberately, doing it intentionally, doing it on purpose, and so on, what these terms are up to. So the instances that I've jotted down that are not from this particular poem, which I'll get to in a minute or two, are things like this. Not just ridiculous, but irresistible, spelled I-R-R-I-S. Risibility is laughableness. Irresistible is you absolutely can't help finding it laughable. You know. Or at least it seems to me that something may be prompting him to misspell it. You know. So, not with the deliberation of Lennon, but with some such thing. Give you the word enchanting. E-N-C-H-A-N-C-T. Enchant. It's got chance in the middle of it. He says, first of all, he writes, it was beautiful, enchanting, Gothic, picturesque, fine, delightful, enchanting, he comes to. So what is happening with these words? He tells Fanny Braun he didn't slight her, and he spells it S-L-E-I-G-H-T as well as S-L-I-G-H-T. So sleight of hand is coming into this. It's not just that he slight or belittle her, it's what is there a slight in his doing this and so on. And they are, I think, very, very beautifully suggestive, though that's compatible with his not having meant them. But he would then want to say that it is afterwards confirmed in a dozen features of propriety. He says, I was astonished, I couldn't believe that I'd written this. It seemed like the production of another person, not my own, but it is afterwards confirmed in a dozen features of propriety. Now, he's saying that about his wording, but what I want to suggest is that it's intimate with what he does with the spelling as something distinguishable from the wording. The wording is slight, but is it EI or is it simply I? Particularly beautiful, rich instance, not from this poem, is this word, gardened it. G-A-R-D-N-E-N-E-D. A casement high and triple arched there was, all garnered with carven imageries. Now what he publishes is garlanded, but what he writes is garlanded. That is, in the stained glass window, it is as if there was a whole garden. It's not just a garland, it's a garden. And I think somebody is entitled to interpret a certain kind of punning beauty to the lines on the basis of the manuscript evidence that though he didn't print that word garden, he gave you the word garden, he gave himself the word garden, and would have agreed that it was afterwards confirmed in a dozen features of propriety. So let me read this poem and then say one or two things about it. I hope you'll see what I mean about these words. Is this an arbor or is it a harbour? It's an arbor, but it's spelt with an H, so that it is up to things which, once the poem is published, are pruned away from it or veiled, but are, I think, part of the life of the poem. So to autumn, please, I'll read it. Not ode to autumn, and I think there's something very beautiful in his understanding that his best ode is so good that you don't call it an ode, because of the way in which the word ode is tall by standing on tiptoe, has a kind of strutting dignity and so on. Okay. Season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless with fruit the vines that round the thatch eaves run, to bend with apples the mossed cottage trees and fill all fruit with ripeness to the core, to swell the gourd and plump the hazel shells with the sweet kernel, to set budding more and still more later flowers for the bees, until they think warm days will never cease, for summer has o'erbrimmed their clammy cells. Who hath not seen thee oft amid thy store? Sometimes whoever seeks abroad may find thee sitting careless on a granary floor, thy hair soft lifted by the winnowing wind, or on a half-reaped furrow sound asleep, drowsed with the fume of poppies, while thy hook spares the next wave and all its twined flowers. And sometimes, like a gleaner, thou dost keep steady thy laden head across a brook, or by a cider press with patient look thou watchest the last oozings, hours by hours. Where are the songs of spring? Aye, where are they? Think not of them, thou hast thy music too, while barred clouds bloom the soft-eyeing day and touch the stubble plains with rosy hue. Then in a wailful choir the small gnats mourn among the river sallows, borne aloft or sinking as the light wind lives or dies, and full-grown lambs loud bleat from hilly bourne, hedge crickets sing, and now with treble soft to the redbreast whistles from a garden croft, and gathering swallows twitter in the skies. So it is, I think, his greatest poem, and I think there's nothing at all wrong with it. I remind you of Randall Jarrell defining a novel as a prose fiction of a certain length with something wrong with it. It's a wonderful way into deciding what greatness is and so on. So for me, the immediate greatness is partly everything to do with sibilance in relation to moistures and so on. Season of mists. And mellow, not going along with that. But fruitfulness going along with it, because it too has two S's, but it's placed them differently. So there are the two S's of season, the two S's of mist, the two S's of fruitfulness. Fruitfulness is then odd because you've got a noun, fruit, from which you create an adverb, fruitful, from which you create a further noun, fruitfulness. So the feeling of the continuing creativity of this, it is wonderfully fruitful. And it opens the question of, will we ever stop those possible additions? because the adjective from fruitfulness will not mean exactly the same as fruitful. Hope, hopeless, hopelessness, and then things come as you... so it's perfectly apt to the sort of procreant cradle that's the poem. More and still more. Later flowers for the bees and so on. Quite lovely in that. Bosom friend, etc. If you turn to the transcription that I've given you, or that we have been given now, thank you. This is by a great scholar, his name is P.J. Croft. People were always hoping that they would catch him out. Libraries should all have his big 2 volumes on autograph poetry of the English language, from which I've taken this and so on. So, season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the nurturing. Now, I'm sure Croft is right, because nobody's ever been able to catch him out. He's now dead, so that who knows, and so on. But, so, what is... Maturing is what he prints, quite rightly, but something in him makes him spell maturing with an N. Like all poets, he cares a lot about the N and M embrace. He cares about it in the way which Dylan does in Oxford Town. All the line endings in Oxford Town are N's and M's and so on. Couldn't get in. All because of the colour of your skin, and that's the N's, then there are the M's. Somebody best to investigate soon. It's all N. It's a bagpipe noise. It's a strange drone that is there, and so on. Anyway, should we ignore naturing? Should we say it makes sure that nature is recognised as what she is, and it makes sure that nurturing, which is one of the big subjects of the poem. So without being explicit, but without printing those words, what we have is I think, a clue that we would not be presumptuous or arrogating to ourselves if we asked about the word nurture and the word nature on the basis of this. And the answer might be no, it is just often when we're writing N and M we might get it wrong or something. Go now to some other words here. Do we want to make anything out of the superlative most? The word most, as he originally writes it, includes the words most, to set more and to set budding more and still more in the stanza. So do you want the word most to get a look in the word most? Is this simply proliferating mistaken possibilities, or is it in touch with something which Keats himself was in touch with, and where he would say, I didn't choose to do it, but it is, etc. So you move on. Do I want to make anything of the spelling of fruits? Probably not. Though it is odd, F-U-R-U-I-T-S. Why might you want a word beginning with F-U-R? And what word might you want? Might it be further, more and still more, further fruits? Is he beginning a thought and then he cuts across his own thought? It's just fruits, but it is actually further fruits. That's moss cottage trees fill all, including these further fruits and so on. What about warm for warm? Until they think warm days with never cease. Until they think warm days will never cease. Days with looks as if it's going in a certain direction, isn't that right? Do you see where I'm wanting to get at? That if we stay a while with these false starts, can we learn from them what you learn from the 6th or 7th or 20th take by Dylan of a song, where something stops because at that moment he's going in a slightly different direction and that's not quite right, but you can see that that gets tucked into the next take and so on. So, let's go then down, please, to the winnowing wind. So he has winnowing, wing. He then changes wing to wind. But that, I think, would justify our saying the beautiful thing about winnowing is that it expands its wing. Yeah. So, because when you've got winnowing wing, that can't be right. He wants winnowing wind, but the perfect continuity atmospherically of the one word with the other, and this sense of something that's an expansion. In one of the other manuscripts, you've got wind mowing. Now, wind mowing is very, very beautiful because it's about mowing and so on. So it's as if there is this proliferation of possibilities entertained, not believed, not finally adopted, but an extraordinary kind of chamber, sound chamber. Why does he want drowsed to be spelled D-O-S-E-D? The poppies are a dose. It's a drug and you can take this. It will make you doze as well as make you drowsy. So you've got dose and doze, D-O-Z-E, and you've got the possibility then you've got D-R, you've got drowse and so on. What are slumbers? Slumbers are really slumbers. They're slumbers, but what you have is this feeling that when you're drowsy, you become a slumber. What is happening to the body is that you slump in the chair and so on. Other ones. Well, let me go to 4 lines up from the foot there, and I was very young when I read F.R. Leavis on these lines, and sometimes like a gleaner, thou dost keep steady thy laden head across a brook. It's been pointed out that it's very difficult if you're carrying something on your head to step across a brook, especially at the autumnal time when things are damp and moist and it's a season of mists. And so the gleaner is to be admired, as men and poems and women too very often admire gleaners. There's something extraordinary. The men are doing this work, the women are doing the gleaning work and so on. Autumn is a woman, and sometimes she's like a mere gleaner, but she's not a mere gleaner, she's a goddess. Sometimes like a gleaner, thou dost keep steady thy laden head across a brook. What Leavis said was that as you step from the line to the next line, you have to balance it in the way in which the gleaner has to. It's a sort of a subject of beautiful poems from other cultures, when, as it were, a Western man is surprised at the dignity and beauty of a woman carrying on her head. It's very Wordsworthian, and it's very, very touching and poignant and honourably gendered as the work is to be done. Sometimes, like a gleaner, thou dost keep steady thy laden head, so that you've got the assonance in the first line and the different assonance in the second line. And in one of the manuscripts, though not this one, he spells it steady. Keep steady. Now, it's very beautiful because the thought behind keep steady is keep straight. And the thought behind keep steady is something to do with your tread. And it's something to do with being ready. That is, that moment when you poise yourself in, it's rather wonderful with my battered face, because I was unable to keep steady my unladen head, just walking along beside the river. But what's happening is sometimes I just keep steady thy laden head. Now, it's not what we should print, because he didn't want us to print it, but it is, I think, a very, very beautiful revelation. And it gives a wonderful start to literary criticism because it says the creator of this was in two minds at some point in creating it. So you're not faced just with a critic's sense of it. I don't mean merely, I do mean just the critic's observation that this may include such and such and such and such. You see what I mean? It's not that straight and strong and steady, and all those things are in him, and ready. Keep ready, thy laden head. Patient look. Well, I think it's very beautiful, I think, the association of patient with something that, when you look properly at it, is unmistakable. It's patient. It's a patent look. It's the patent look of patience. That's what it is. And that goes with this feeling that you must not be in a hurry. Autumn takes her time. The extraordinary fecundity, the foison of autumn is there. And if we go over, please, to the next page, at what point do my suggestions become too far-fetched and ridiculous? Why do I like Sping? Where are the songs of Sping instead of Spring? Well, actually, they're the songs of Spinks. Spinks and ouzels sing sublimely. Christopher Smart knew that. So Spink is a bird sound and a bird song, particularly identified by a very notable predecessor. Is stibble, what's the relation of stibble to stubble? Something seems to be happening with these. So that's the sort of thing I would want to do with the poem. Do you know what I mean? Suggest that one very good avenue towards thinking about the creator's creativity is all the things that he or she went through. So that the Dickinson, the absolutely extraordinary range of possibilities, literally, if you count every variant as giving you the possibility of a new poem, she wrote 1 million poems. Because every occasion on which she's got 10 variants, and you go through the permutation of each one of those with each of the other variants, you're up with 1 million poems. And her refusal to strike them out again and again, sometimes she will strike something out, but a lot of the time she just leaves them there, and so etc. And I'd want to relate that then. Please, I should take questions, but what I care about here is the relation of this to other things that he said. This is very beautiful from the letters. One of the 3 books I have with me is Shakespeare's poems. I ne'er found so many beauties in the sonnets. They seem to me full of fine things said unintentionally, in the intensity of working out conceits. Now, it's very beautiful that you go from said unintentionally into the intensity. It's the intensity which provides that. It's said unintentionally in the intensity of working out conceits. Is this to be borne? Now, that's the old question which Walter Jackson Bate of Harvard asked about what is there left to write after Shakespeare? You know, that terrible problem, the anxiety, the burden of influence, the anxiety which turns into some of Harold Bloom's arguments. Is this to be borne? Hark ye, and then you get absolutely lovely lines. He has left nothing to say about nothing or anything. And he keeps coming back in the letters to this question of, as it were, the Freudian slip. It's only afterwards that you realise, and I think we've all had some moment when we said something perfectly innocently and people good-naturedly laughed, and we realised that was a rather good pun. I mean, that is, it wasn't premeditated. It just arose spontaneously then and there. So I'll invite some suggestions. It's a rich area for self-revelation unwished. it's a very good area for that too. You betray yourself. Shakespeare loves giving powerful women Freudian slips, and loves the doubt as to whether they knew what they were doing, whether they knew, or can we confidently say Cleopatra's slip of the tongue at that point is highly calculated, and so on. Where do we go with that? The head of my college, not the college I went to, the college I taught at in Oxford, was a man called Oliver Franks. He had been the British ambassador to Washington. He had been the chairman of Lloyd's Bank. He had already been the head of Oxford College, and he'd been a professor in one of the Scottish universities. And he took a salary cut of 90% in order to take the job of provost of the college. He cut it to 1/10 of what the Lloyd's Bank was paying him. And he got up at the alumni, or rather old members' weekend, and he said, I have been here only a very short while, and I still have a great deal to learn. Oliver Franks would not in a million years have done anything so vulgar as mention the fact that he was taking a salary cut, but something in Oliver Franks did want to mention the fact that he was taking a salary cut of 90%, and it was perfectly caught in I still have a great deal, a word which has a financial sense and has a convenient L. Still have a great deal to learn. Immediately corrected by him, I had voted against him. I was listening, therefore, very carefully to what he was saying. The people who voted for the person who gets the job are never listening, they're just purring. But I had voted against disappointment and so on. So I was listening, and I swear to you, he said, and swerved in a split second. Now, that has its own creativity. It has the creativity of this odd double sense of betrayal, where the really authentic thing that you say is a betrayal, and so on. Anyway, that's my position on this subject. Please ask me something.